Welcome to This Explainer. You know, when most of us picture the French Revolution, our minds immediately jump to, well, bloody riots, the guillotine, and the storming of the Bastille, right? But what if I told you the whole thing actually kicked off not with weapons, but with this incredibly tense, drawn-out procedural standoff? Yeah. Between May and July of 1789, the initial battleground was literally a parliament floor.
So how exactly did a meeting in an indoor tennis court manage to topple an ancient, absolute monarchy? To understand that, we need to trace a tense chronological countdown. It's this fascinating story of political maneuvering, absolute defiance, and everyday people suddenly realizing their collective strength. We're going to walk through exactly how a group of commoners managed to outmaneuver the crown week by week, and honestly, sometimes hour by hour.
Okay, to really set the stage, on May 4th, 1789, you have to picture the glaring visual inequality that was forced upon the commoners. When the Estates General, which was the French National Assembly, was summoned, the Royal Master of Ceremonies actually strictly mandated the dress code. The nobles, they were told to wear these spectacular cloaks with gold trim and hats with white plumes, kind of in the style of King Henry IV. But the Third Estate, the deputies representing the commoners who made up the vast majority of France, they were expressly forbidden from showing off. They were literally ordered to buy and wear these somber, plain black cloaks. It was a completely deliberate visual tactic to remind them of their lower status before anyone even opened their mouth.
But, all that pomp and pageantry couldn't hide the absolute mess the French government was in. When the formal session opened the very next day, the deputies were on the edge of their seats, waiting for a bold strategy to fix the nation's severe financial crisis. Instead, the failing accountant, Finance Minister Jacques Necker, stands up and delivers a mind-numbing 3-hour speech. Seriously, 3 hours. And the absolute worst part, as he just droned on and on reading about the kingdom's dire finances, he offered no actual plan of action for the deputies to debate. Zero. It was a staggering disappointment for everyone in that room who had expected some real leadership.
Well, that complete lack of leadership forced the deputies' hands. On the morning of May 6th, the clergy and the nobles were directed to separate rooms to verify their credentials. Now, this was a calculated move designed to keep the estates divided into 3 distinct, highly unequal chambers. Realizing the system was, quite frankly, totally rigged against them, the Third Estate made a really radical choice. They just refused to verify their credentials in a separate room. In doing so, they essentially launched a massive, high-stakes parliamentary sit-down strike. They refused to conduct any business whatsoever until the clergy and nobility agreed to join them in a single, unified assembly where votes would be counted by head, not by class.
As this completely unprecedented stalemate dragged on throughout May, some really distinct characters started to emerge within the Third Estate, particularly from a highly organized faction of radical thinkers known as the Breton Club. People observing at the time took sharp notes on these guys. You had Le Chapelier, who was characterized as a violent madman, and Barnave, known as a gilder of words. But the undisputed standout here was the master orator, Mirabeau. An observer actually described him as an enraged, ferocious beast who spoke in convulsions and just spat out his words in a fury. Mirabeau's booming voice and absolute command of the room essentially became the engine driving the Third Estate's resistance. Meanwhile, outside the actual halls of power, something totally unprecedented was happening. An 18th century equivalent of a social media explosion was taking place, turning this whole political standoff into a massive, rapidly escalating public spectacle. English traveler Arthur Young documented this frenzy, noting the unbelievable business going on in the pamphlet shops of Paris. He reported 92 new pamphlets published in just one single week. I mean, deputies were printing their speeches, journalists were firing off these passionate editorials, and the public was just eagerly consuming every single word. The political debate had literally spilled right out into the streets. And ordinary people didn't just passively watch this, they became active participants. Up to 2,000 spectators packed the galleries at Versailles to witness the proceedings. Back in Paris, huge crowds were gathering outside coffee houses, mouths agape, listening as impromptu orators read the latest news out loud. And Arthur Young was actually pretty alarmed by this whole scene. He noted that the spectators in the galleries were loudly clapping and cheering, acting as vocal participants who were actively trying to overrule the debate and influence the entire political course of the nation. Politics was quickly becoming live public theater. So all this intense public pressure shifts the momentum into high gear by mid-June. On June 13th, three parish priests actually break ranks with the clergy and defect to join the Third Estate, and they're met with tears of joy and thunderous applause. By June 15th, the deputies realize, hey, we are no longer just the Third Estate, and they start debating an entirely new name for themselves. Then, on June 17th, they make a world-changing move. They officially declare themselves the National Assembly and immediately claim that all existing taxes are illegal unless approved by them. Just think about that. In a few short days, they completely cut the cable binding them to the existing institutions, boldly stripping King Louis XVI of his ancient power to raise money. Now, an absolute monarch obviously cannot let a challenge like that just go unanswered, right? The deputies arrived for their meeting on the morning of June 20th to a pretty shocking sight. The doors to their grand meeting hall were firmly closed, locked shut, and guarded by soldiers. Fearing that the increasingly out-of-touch king was about to arrest them or entirely dismiss the estate's general, panic and outrage just rippled through the deputies. They were now a National Assembly without a home. Scrambling to find a room anywhere near large enough to hold all 600 of them, they rushed into, of all places, the king's own indoor tennis court. Under the leadership of their president, Sylvan Bai Li, the deputies raised their hands and swore a solemn oath. They vowed that they absolutely would not disperse, no matter what the king commanded or where they were forced to move, until they had firmly established a written constitution for France. This is the legendary tennis court oath. It's a moment of pure, unadulterated defiance that changed history forever. However, as we dig into this explainer, we do have to pause and highlight a major, glaring contradiction here. In the very heat of demanding liberty, equality, and unalienable rights, the assembly was approached by wealthy plantation owners from the French colony of Saint-Domingue. These men asked to be admitted to the assembly and swear the oath alongside the patriots. And, caught up in the emotion of the whole moment, the assembly accepted them. By doing so, they essentially brought the brutal institution of slavery under the protection of the new nation. It's a deep, tragic irony that would continue to haunt the French Revolution's quest for universal liberty. Just 3 days after that historic oath, King Louis XVI finally made his move. On June 23rd, he summoned everyone to what was called a royal session. While he did throw them a bone with some minor tax reforms, he ultimately resorted to his absolute authority. He explicitly voided the new National Assembly, declared all of their resolutions from June 17th onwards completely illegal, and commanded that the three estates remain strictly separate. He ended with a stark threat to take matters into his own hands if they defied him, and then ordered the deputies to immediately disperse. The nobles and the upper clergy obeyed and left the room, but the commoners, they stayed glued to their seats. The royal master of ceremonies stepped up and reiterated the king's command to leave. But instead of obeying, our Guy Mirabeau stands up and delivers this piece of absolute cinematic gold directly to the king's official. He thundered, "I tell you that if you have orders to make us leave here, you should ask for orders to employ force, because we will only be driven from our places by bayonets." I mean, what a staggering moment of bravery. He was looking the absolute monarchy dead in the eye and literally daring the king to unleash the military against the representatives of the people. And remarkably, the king blinked first. He failed to order the troops in. Emboldened by this massive victory, the momentum heavily shifted. On June 24th, the majority of the remaining clergy officially joined the assembly's ranks. The very next day, 50 noble deputies, led by the king's own cousin, defected and joined as well. Faced with thousands of angry Parisians surrounding his palace and wild rumors that his own soldiers in Paris were mutinying, the king was completely trapped. On June 27th, he officially ordered all remaining holdouts to join the single assembly. He was, quite literally, forced to legitimize the National Assembly. For a brief, fleeting moment, it actually looked like the revolution was complete and entirely peaceful. Arthur Young even packed his bags to leave Paris. But just as the deputies enthusiastically started drafting their new constitution in early July, terrifying reports started streaming in. The king hadn't given up. He was just regrouping. Word rapidly spread that Louis XVI was quietly surrounding the capital with heavily armed regiments brought in from the frontiers. And importantly, these were primarily foreign mercenary troops. We're talking about soldiers who wouldn't hesitate for a single second to fire on French citizens. Behind the scenes, conservative courtiers had managed to convince the king that it was time to take decisive, violent action to crush this political rebellion once and for all. On the night of July 11th, the plan was set in motion. The relatively moderate finance minister Necker was abruptly dismissed and ordered to flee the country immediately.
A new hardline ministry was formed, and military commanders were ordered to be ready to put down any protests in Paris by force. The shadow of the bayonet had finally arrived at the deputies' doorstep. So, as heavily armed foreign troops close in and absolute panic grips the streets of Paris, we're going to leave you right here on the precipice of an explosion. But I want you to consider this final thought. In the ultimate showdown for the soul of a nation, which will actually survive? The ringing, powerful words of the National Assembly or the cold, hard steel of the king's bayonets? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and stay curious.